Hey there, I'm Tobias, and welcome to another edition of Realms Album Quest. Realms Album Quest is a series where I catalogue and discuss all the albums I've listened to over the past week. Last week I listened to 15 different albums, the best of which was the classic Chicago soul record Curtis by legendary artist Curtis Mayfield. This week I also listened to 15 different albums, so let's get straight into them. The first album I listened to this past week I actually listened to last Thursday, around the time the last video went up. I was on the fence about whether or not I wanted to consider this project an album, as it technically was a project composed of B-sides, but eventually I came round on describing this as an album, and I'm glad I did, because it means I get to talk about how great it is. Of course I'm talking about Dedicated Side B, from the Canadian pop icon Carly Rae Jepsen. In my opinion, this album is just as good as its respective A-side. It takes a few tracks to truly get into it, but from Stay Away onwards it gets really, really good. Stay Away is an upbeat and groovy dance pop banger. The production on This Is What They Say is out of this world and has one of the catchiest hooks of any pop song this year, and Summer Love has this supremely funky Tame Impala-esque beat that you can't help moving to. It's not a secret that I'm a huge fan of Carly Rae Jepsen's music, but this record absolutely meets the standard you'd expect from an artist of her calibre. On the subject of artists meeting their expected standards, the very scary Gary MC, Freddie Kane himself, back with another serving of straight heat, teaming up with California-based production legend The Alchemist, Freddie Gibbs does not miss on Alfredo. Tracks like God Is Perfect and Baby Shit are just two of many examples on this album of Freddie spitting tales of drug dealing and protecting his legacy with his smooth as butter flows, while The Alchemist lays down these hazy laid-back beats. Frank Lucas breaks this mould as the beat goes harder than the other tracks on this record, but as we've all seen by now, Freddie Gibbs goes to work on any instrumental put in front of him. The features on this record are all generally solid. The only one I wasn't sold on was Tyler the Creator's, where I felt like he phoned it in a little bit compared to what he delivers on his own records. He's still pretty good, but definitely stayed firmly in his comfort zone on something to rap about. Nonetheless, Alfredo is undoubtedly a contender for my album of 2020 so far, and is a fantastic addition to Gibbs' ever-growing list of classics. Friday also saw me listen to a record I've been hotly anticipating for some time now. Met with delay upon delay, Control by Latvian metal group TESA is the band's fourth studio album, and their second with the My Proud Mountain record label. Following on from their third album Ghost, a record I first heard last year and loved, Control continues in a very similar vein to the band's earlier work. The sludge metal influences are clear, however the record is a lot less drony and focuses a lot more on the band's post-rock leanings. This is by no means a bad thing, and the progressions on Control 1 and Control 5 are some of my favourites I've heard this year, culminating in extremely cathartic releases of crunchy guitar riffs met by powerful drum breakdowns. If you're a metalhead, definitely consider adding this one to your back catalogue, you won't regret it. The first record I gave a try on Saturday was a recommendation from Sniperwave, a man whose name you'll no doubt hear many times in these videos. Sniperwave sent me the most recommendations out of anyone in 2019, and currently sits atop the 2020 scoreboard with 29 recommendations this year. This particular recommendation is the ambient bliss that is Inks by French producer Vincent Villerouille, aka Aes Dana. Released last year, Inks combines luscious hypnotic soundscapes with driving techno beats. For its extended runtime, Inks does a fantastic job of staying interesting and not growing tiresome. Tracks like Unfold and Alep Offset are long-running techno bangers that intrigue and captivate from start to finish, and whilst Transparency Syndrome is perhaps the only cut close to failing to do this, it's still an enjoyable listen. For any house or trance fans, this is an essential record that you'll regret not listening to sooner. After listening to Inks, I finally got around to listening to the new record from Brooklyn-based rapper Medhane Olushola, Cold Water. Following up from his 2019 debut Own Pace, which I listened to a couple months ago, Cold Water is an extremely satisfying sophomore record. Whilst reminiscent of Own Pace in a number of ways, it's evident that Medhane's pen game has improved significantly since his first record. The instrumentals on the record are as glitchy and hypnotic as they ever were, for example as on the tracks Late and Full Hands featuring Maxo, and Medhane delivers some absolutely killer flows on Don't Fuck Around. These elements reach their collective zenith on the track TRS featuring Navy Blue, which features fantastic production and great performances from both Medhane and Navy Blue. I'm really excited to see what's next for Medhane after two stellar albums in quick succession. On Saturday I also listened to the new project from cult favourite Californian glitch pop group Baths, the sequel to their 2011 release Pop Music / False B-Sides. I've never been super keen on Baths. their 2013 effort Obsidian being one of the first albums I listened to during my album quest. Typically I found the production on their records to be too stripped back to the point of being kind of boring to listen to. This is exactly why I was pleasantly surprised at how good a lot of the cuts on Pop Music / False B-Sides 2 were. The upbeat glitchy production on Tropic Laurel really stood out to me, and the highlight of the record by far was Sex, a slow burner with an incredibly wonky and lazy vibe which eventually builds up to a fantastically beautiful breakdown. Unfortunately, some of the shorter tracks on this record, namely Fortuna and Veranda Shove, felt pretty half-baked and that they only really existed to bulk out the tracklist. But on the whole, this is definitely my favourite project from the group so far. My Sunday started out with regret. Of course, I mean I regret claims I made last week about disliking pop punk, because the new Jeff Rosenstock record No Dream has me fully on board with the genre. Despite having not yet listened to his highly acclaimed 2016 record Worry, I saw that this record has been making waves recently, so I decided I'd give it a try. And I'm very glad I did. The only album to match this level of raw, unfiltered energy this year is probably Melee from Michigan emo and post-hardcore group Dogleg. Rosenstock truly sounds like he's giving everything he's got and more on some of these tracks, particularly Nikes and Fame. The guitars are crazy distorted and the drums are relentless throughout the record. No Dream is a straight 40 minutes of pure power. Monday saw me finally getting round to listening to the new record from the queen of pop herself, Lady Gaga. The record is titled Chromatica and is Gaga's 6th solo effort and the first since 2016's Joanne. Chromatica has a mixture of dance pop and deep house cuts, and I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. I was a bigger fan of the deeper cuts such as Alice and Replay, and the track Sour Candy featuring Blackpink was by far my favourite on the record. The Blackpink feature was great, and I loved the way that Gaga shifted between spoken and sung vocal performances. All this over a fantastic house instrumental made for a worthwhile listen. Unfortunately, there were a couple tracks I wasn't so keen on, namely Free Woman and Sign From Above featuring Elton John. On Free Woman, while I agreed with the key message of the track, the instrumental and Gaga's delivery both felt like something I've heard many times before, while Elton John's feature on Sign From Above is so shockingly awful that I actually didn't even realise it was him to begin with. Nonetheless, Chromatica is still a pretty good record and one of many solid efforts from Gaga. I also listened to another recommendation from Sniper Wave on Monday, in the form of old school house album Phillips by the German producer and DJ Lauer. Phillips combines elements of new disco with a very nostalgic brand of deep house, to the point that you'd be forgiven for thinking this record was released in the 1990s instead of in 2012. Tracks like Coppers and Frontex Slow Fox do a really good job of combining ambient house music with arpeggiated synths reminiscent of late 90s / early 2000s trance, while Sheldor incorporates a number of elements of techno, which is very likely the resulting influence of the German dance music scene on Lauer's music. Once again, Sniper Wave seems unable to break the curse of the 8s as he delivers yet another high-quality album to my inbox. Tuesday saw me exploring the new record from Californian indie rock band Deerhoof titled Future Teenage Cave Artists. Future Teenage Cave Artists, while the 17th record from Deerhoof at this point, was my first introduction to the band. Despite not having the context of their previous records, I still enjoyed this one quite a lot. I loved the eccentric vocal style over psychedelic instrumentation on tracks such as Sympathy for the Baby Boo, and the noise rock influences on Reduced Guilty, was approached in a way I've never really heard before on any other records that incorporate the same genres. Unfortunately, the band's eccentricities got a bit too much to bear on the track New Orphan Asylum for Spirited Dear Children. However, this did not take away from my enjoyment of the record as a whole, and I definitely recommend it to any indie rock or noise rock fans. Tuesday evening saw me listen to another classic record from an indie folk artist who I find, the more I listen to, the more I love his music. I'm of course talking about the legend Elliott Smith, the album in question being his self-titled record. Truly there isn't a bad song on this album. Smith's writing style is some of the most depressive and vulnerable you'll hear on any record in your lifetime, while the lo-fi indie folk instrumentation puts you right alongside Smith throughout all of his pain and suffering, almost as if you're experiencing these things for yourself. Smith's intonation on some of these tracks is almost tortured, and tracks such as Christian Brothers and Single File are some of the most gorgeous folk songs I've ever heard. If you're an indie folk fan, this is absolutely a record for you to try. My first record on Wednesday was the new horrorcore project from Canadian rapper and producer Backxwash, God Has Nothing to Do With This, Leave Him Out of It. The second album from Backxwash, God Has Nothing to Do With This, Leave Him Out of It, is an album I don't think I ever would have turned on to if not for Anthony Fantano. given that prior to his review of this record, Backxwash was pulling around 3,000 monthly listeners. The record itself is fantastic, with extremely violent hip-hop instrumentation underlying seriously violent and aggressive vocals, lyrics detailing the racism, transphobia, and other struggles that Backxwash faces as a black trans woman. Despite the fact that this record was almost definitely produced prior to the recent protests in the US following the murder of George Floyd, God Has Nothing to Do with This, Leave Him Out of It feels like a record that appropriately embodies the current spirit of the times within America. I also listened to another recommendation from Sniper Wave, something a little bit different from the usual post-rock, post-metal or progressive electronic records he usually sends me. The record in question is titled Pieces of You, The Voices Works, from French multi-instrumentalist heklAa. The album incorporates elements of modern classical, but the textures and structures of each track, especially You, My Cathedrals and Home, are incredibly luscious and beautiful, almost to the point of feeling more like an ambient record than a classical album. The song Love Nibbleism is the only one on the album to feature a lead vocal performance, and perhaps subsequently is my least favourite on the record, as I didn't so much feel that any of the previous tracks were lacking anything. Still, this album was pretty good on the whole, and clocking in at just under 30 minutes, it would be a good way to spend half an hour of your time. Today, you could find me starting off my day listening to yet another recommendation from Sniper Wave, the final one from this week I promise, in the form of a new record Beyond by French hardcore producer Sunhiausa. The album incorporates elements of new style gabba and speedcore, as well as a variety of other harder dance music genres including, but not limited to, hardstyle, extra tone, and even hard trance on the track Extinction. The use of euphoric leads soaked in reverb on tracks such as Beyond and The Tide of History proves that Sunhiausa is definitely an experienced and skilled artist in his field. But the fact that Beyond runs for over 70 minutes, falling back on the same tropes and techniques on almost every single track, makes me feel like the record could have easily culled quite a lot of the material on here and been a much more compelling listen. Nonetheless, it was still enjoyable to consume, and definitely worth waiting around for the track Tropical Storm, which incorporates tropical house instrumentation into a hardcore beat, making it undeniably the most creative track on the record. If you're into harder electronic stuff, this one is absolutely worth checking out. The final album I listened to this week was Californian folk artist Christian Lee Hutson's new album, Beginners. A beautiful little contemporary folk album, Beginners is Hutson's second album and his first with Anti Records. The album's a surefire contemporary folk record through and through, and whilst Hutson doesn't reinvent any wheels throughout the album's 36-minute runtime, it's still a very sweet listening experience. I especially love the swelling brass instrumentation towards the close of Twin Soul, and my favourite track of all on Beginners was definitely Get the Old Band Back Together, a very light but upbeat song about reconnecting with old interests. Though Beginners may not be the most unique album you'll ever hear, it still nails a tried and true formula, and is an album I'll no doubt find myself returning to as time goes on. So there we have it. Those are the 15 albums I listened to over the past week. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts on these albums if you have listened to or choose to listen to any of them, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, and until next time, enjoy the records.